mode.
I'd like to welcome everybody to our LMI Best Practice series on teleometrics, and I need to, I am getting noise, and I'm not sure, but it may be coming from you, Kent. Can you mute your microphone for right now? I'm getting noise. This is our second of 3 teleometrics online webinars. Today's webinar will be on using teleometrics with LMI programs, presented by Kent Fries, the PhD and founder of Factor Factory and an LMI franchisee since 2004. But before we get started, I would like to go over some housekeeping items. They are, we are starting off this webinar with everybody being muted because we are recording this session, and we want to come out with the best recording that we can, and the best way to do that is to have everybody muted until there's time for questions. When there are time for questions, Kent will say, are there any questions? At which point, if you raise your hand, I will see that and I will call on you, unmute you, and you can ask your question. You could also send us a question on the panel based on your control panel. You can send a question in that manner. So with that being said, let's get started. I'm going to be turning this over to Kent.
All right, Sam.
I'm working on this. Let's see. First of all, can you see my screen, Kent?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And make presenter. Okay, you should have something that says show my screen.
I got it. There we go. Can you see the slideshow?
I could see the slideshow. Now, last week somebody said it probably would be easier to read if you did it full screen, but if you feel like you need to have your panel on the left, that's your prerogative.
I can do that. Let me just try here. Wait a minute.
Okay, down at the bottom you have little icons, and that's the one.
And my problem is, there it is. So use presenter view. And I'm trying.
I think F5. There we go. Well, no. There we are. We got it.
Got it?
You got it.
Okay. There we go. All right. Yeah, sorry, folks. I've got multiple screens, and I had to, I've got to be able to see what I'm doing on one with some things behind the scenes and show you guys a full screen. So hopefully that's the best view. And but it's great to be here today for the second webinar. As Sam said, I'm Kent Fries, and I will be your guide today. And we're going to take a look at how to use the Teleo assessments within existing LMI programs. We'll actually take some time to go through each one. And here is our, let's see here, there we go. So I'd like to walk through each of the telemetrics models and show within the context of the ELD, the EPP, and the EPL ways you might use each of these assessments. So I connected them. Some of that I've done within programs where I've really brought in the Teleo. Some of it I haven't tried yet, but hopefully it generates some good ideas and good thinking for everyone. The other part, I will share with you a link to complete each of the 6, actually the 5 additional assessments beyond the communication that you've already seen. So our agenda today is look at the models. I'll share the sample link, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And if we have new people on the phone, just so you know who I am, this is a little bit of my bio. I won't walk through it, but I do have a background in assessments and the assessment technology and statistics and all that. to be able to accurately translate these, move them online, and whatnot. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me. I'd be happy to share more details about my background and bio. I'm going to briefly go through this again. I know most of you have seen it, but I think it's useful to explore this, and sometimes it can be a little confusing. But the original Achieving Leader project was a very large project, study of leadership, involved 350 companies, 16,000 managers, and with feedback partners, over 60,000 total participants. The key part about this is the couple things to think about here that I didn't talk about last week. One is the original study and the data that we have. The assessments that are online are based on those norms in this data. That data is from essentially the 80s and the early 90s. The beauty of having this online now is we are able to update this data. So we have more current data. We can have localized country data at some point once we gather enough data. We can also localize data or the comparison norms to specific groups like manufacturing managers, those types of things. So having it online allows us to begin to take this study and revise the norms, revalidate some of the findings of the study. Very powerful things now that we're capturing all of the data through the online system. As I shared before, the study was based on looking at manager performance, and this is manager performance using performance data about how valuable the manager was. They used an MAQ measure that looked at promotion rates, and that also aligned with other factors of achievement for the managers. And the key here was that we're looking at the managers, the high-achieving managers, to find out through these assessments what might be different about the high-achieving managers. And the study was powerful in that the attitudes and behaviors of these high achievers at the far right was different and unique from the average achievers and the low achievers. And as we go through this, the assessments that we'll look at today and that were part of the study involve values, employee involvement, communication, work motivation, power and empowerment, and management style. And as you saw last time, the top achievers did indeed exhibit unique attitudes and behaviors that were identified in the study. The reason this is important is this demonstrated that there is a model of high-achieving management that can be measured and used, and we have that model. Moving forward, I shared some terminology last time with you. The idea of an assessment is what we call these sometimes assessment tests. Usually I avoid the term test because it's a loaded term that makes people uncomfortable. So generally when I talk to people about this, I try to call it an assessment. You also hear the term survey, and survey is really the questions they answer. The assessment is really taking that survey, running the calculations, and producing the result report. So there are kind of three stages of the assessment process. A batch is a purchased block of assessments. Like on our system, we set up a batch for each assessment for this webinar that allows me to share a link with all of you, and you can complete the assessments. You are partners in this environment and on the system, and you'll have your own login and password so you can access the system and get to your own results. You'll get that with your first order. We'll set up an account. We'll send you the account information. Went through that a little bit last week. The assessment taker, which is Rich pointed out last time, might be better called the respondent, which is a good idea, is the participant who actually completes a survey. So a participant in a process would be an assessment taker or respondent. And also raters who give feedback to the participants are also assessment takers or respondents. We also use the term multi-rater. All of the Teleo assessments are multi-rater, meaning you can have a leader participant, someone you're actually working with, take a self-assessment, but also we can get feedback typically from three feedback partners or raters, as we call them here, who provide feedback on their perspective of that leader's attitudes and behaviors. So just a quick review of the terminology. So let's jump in and have a look at the 6 models here that we've talked about. So as we move into these models, a couple things to keep in mind that, I make the point here, I played around with the idea of LMI and Teleo are like peanut butter and jelly. I didn't put the peanut butter and jelly on here, but I do believe that they complement one another quite well. And as you look at the Teleo, the individual assessments, and start to think about LMI programs, They match well with the underlying philosophy of LMI and even the structure of the programs, especially like the ELD. And we know that change begins with awareness, that as people begin to realize the need for change, they're more apt to make change, and the change is more likely to be sticky or sustainable. And I think within an LMI program, being able to provide people with objective feedback can be a very powerful tool, and Teleo gives us unique tools to do that. The ability to get objective feedback from others is additionally very powerful. And I think picking assessments here based on process objectives, often how one of these assessments might work will be dependent on what your customer or client is trying to achieve, and even what individual objectives are for the participants in the program can be important as well to selection of good assessments. And as I say here, I think the Teleo assessments also help generate good discussion group settings where you're doing work with a group in a process. I think this feedback, maybe not sharing individual feedback, but the model and the feedback itself can generate good discussion. And I also, as I mentioned last time, people love to get feedback about themselves. Good point here too. The next point is that often participants may think they're doing the right things around, say, communication, but when they get objective feedback and they find out they don't compare very well with the high achieving standard, often that helps them begin to see that there's work to be done and may motivate them to set better goals. The last part there is showing progress through post-process measures. There's another way we could talk about it, kind of outside the scope of today's discussion, but you can do pre and post measures, like around leadership values is an area where I've commonly done it in the past, where you do pre measures, you have everybody complete it, and then post-process you have everybody complete it again, and then you show the change through the process. It can be a powerful way to show the value of a program. So some things to think about here as we drop into the models. So as you saw, that the 6 are values: involvement, communication, motivation, power, and style. Let's have a look. So the first is leadership values. So what we're looking at in the assessments I mentioned, the first assessment, the managerial philosophy survey, actually looks at belief systems, attitudes, belief systems, values is another way to look at it. I think those are somewhat synonymous in this context, but the idea here is that if I understand someone's underlying belief systems about leadership and about people in the workplace, I begin to understand the drivers of behavior. If I don't understand those things, often it's difficult to change behavior, or behavior change is very superficial or short-term. So this is an important thing to begin to understand and help people see. What we know from the managerial philosophy survey that uses McGregor's theory X, theory Y, is that there are 2 what McGregor called cosmologies of beliefs. One he called theory X, or X beliefs, which was a model that people dislike and avoid work, need to be controlled, and that individual or personal goals don't always align well with organizational goals, and that people generally need to be controlled at some level. That was the theory X beliefs. And a key part is that people have limited growth potential. You can imagine if someone's belief systems are biased towards theory X, they have a very limited set of solutions for management problems of motivation and alignment of people with work, and they tend to compensate for people's weaknesses. And it's a limited array of solutions. It tends to be carrots and sticks, and not very innovative in terms of leadership effectiveness. On the other side, you have theory Y beliefs, and theory Y leaders or managers who are predominantly theory Y tend to have a more positive outlook of people at work. They see work as something employees want to do, given the right conditions, will be proactive in their work, and will look for ways to achieve and do good work. Also, I mentioned here that people are capable of self-direction, self-management. In other words, if I help set goals and objectives and let people figure out how to get it done with a theory Y belief, that's more natural, that's more acceptable. So these aspects of theory Y tend to create a broader solution set for managers that goes from maybe command and control up through more collaborative approaches to management. why beliefs we know were characteristic or more characteristic of the high achievers. And I show in this graph here what the study showed, which is on the right side, if you remember that bar graph, or I'm sorry, the bell curve that I showed you earlier, on the far right were the high achievers. And you'll see there in the study it showed that the high achievers, or the high MAQ, in the study were predominantly theory Y, much lower theory X. The mid-range average managers were what's sometimes called XY confused. They had very similar X and Y results in the scoring. And then the low achievers tend to be predominantly theory X, and this graph represents the results that we saw that Jay Hall saw in the study. So we know that high achievers favor theory Y, and this can be a powerful tool in your programs to help leaders begin to evaluate, what do I really believe and why? And do my beliefs support effective behaviors? And some things to think about is that this reflection can be useful in the Effective Leadership Development course in Lesson 1. The lesson about successful leaders are made to begin to get people to reflect on their belief systems and to think about it and get objective feedback. Same thing with the EPL Lesson 8. This could be a good fit in there as well. Again, depending on the person's role, if they're in a managerial role, this can be very effective. Perhaps less so for non-managerial participants, but again, that the whole array of Teleo tools are generally targeted to people in a formal leadership role. The EPP as well. If you have managers in an EPP, this can be very effective to insert perhaps into Lesson 5 about empowering the team and looking at how they use power, why they use power. And there is a power assessment, but perhaps using the leadership values assessment would get people to reflect on what they believe about people, and from that look at healthier ways to effectively use power, and again drive good goal setting and get them to think about it. I'm going to move on to involvement, but if Sam, if people put their hands up, we could actually take a break. Does anyone have questions here before I move on? Why don't I just take a break? I was thinking before we go through all 6. You'll lose your questions. Any questions so far about where we're at?
We do have Alan, and I am going to unmute him. Alan, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if my speaker works today.
Okay. Say hello to everyone.
It's working.
It's
I just
working
want to
good.
tell you what Ken, I just want to tell you what a great job you're doing. And if anybody here has any doubts how this works, I suggest you read the Harwood Dilemma. You know, it's about a manufacturing company in the 40s that did this stuff. They increased their productivity 14% higher than they ever had before. 20 years later, they bought another company, and they said, hey, we won't fire you if you just learn how to do what we do. Let's see what happens. They did it. They came up to the same level as Harwood. So I suggest you pay close attention to this. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alan.
Okay, that's it. Go ahead.
Good. Okay. Let's move on then. Let's see if I can get back here. There we go. So the next area of the model is employee involvement. And the idea here is how do we more effectively use collaboration and delegation in the workplace, and the survey is the Access Management Survey. The 2 key components of the survey are gatekeeping and access. So the employee involvement looks at how do we get people more involved in decision making and really solving the problems that matter to them in the workplace in the model. And the powerful part about this is, one, what we know is that it requires 2 elements, and one is gatekeeping. And gatekeeping in the simplest terms is inviting people to be part of the problem-solving environment. And the interesting thing about the study was that without being invited, often employees are reluctant to get involved. Sometimes managers tend to overlook that. They feel like, well, I hire them, they know what their job is. Of course, they will get involved in solving problems that relate to their role. But the reality is very different, that if they're not inviting them to become involved, again, in those second-order problems of work redesign, process redesign, things like that, they won't do it. They tend to not do it. And gatekeeping is the key that managers learn. You need to invite them in to that problem-solving environment. Once they're invited in, then they need access to actually address the issues. And Hall in the access, the employee involvement module or model broke it down into 5 areas. One was access to the problems that matter. These are real problems, not superficial problems like deciding where to have the Christmas party. It is problems that are germane to company success and relate to this person's role. The other area in these 5 areas was access to the information they need to understand the problem. Sometimes this gets into more confidential information. And a good example of this is when I bring in controllers or CFOs into a process, they tend to score low often on communication because they're used to withholding a lot of information, keeping a lot of information confidential. And the financial people in a company are a good example where sometimes it's better off to share more information than less, and helping managers understand that need for access to information is key. The next is people, and the assessment here measures actually in each of these 5 areas, provides them with a measure of how strong they are in these access areas in terms of employee involvement. So access to people is access to the right people, the people who they need to help solve the problem. And that may be access to an outside consultant who's an expert in a software system like an ERP system that the company uses, or it could be access to other employees who perhaps work different shifts or in different areas of the company, maybe that are more remote or difficult to get to. So the idea here is if they need access to people, they should be given access to the people they need to solve the problem. The next area is management support, which involves both emotional support as well as more logistical support, policy support. So the idea there is that managers are helpful. So if you get involved in, the employees are involved in problem solving, they make a mistake, they fall down, they struggle, the managers are there to encourage them to press through, to get up, clean themselves off, and continue. And often managers will fail to do that. The other side of management support is policies. If the company has ineffective policies or policies that are actually impeding problem solving, then the manager supports them by changing or finding out what needs to happen to change those policies. And the last, perhaps most important access area is when people are involved in problem solving, that you allow them to actually implement the solution, with the idea being that we get them involved in the problem solving process, they come back with great solutions, they get together on their own, and they come back with a solution to us. And we say, as managers, great, we'll take that under advisement. Or let me think about it. In a busy schedule, the solution gets lost, forgotten about, or never followed through on. That is very ineffective employee involvement. And often that's an area that breaks down. And you can see this very clearly as people go through the process and complete the assessments, as they see their levels. As you get familiar with this, it can start to become very clear that a manager is not allowing employees to hit the right problems, or like I recently had with a good manager I work with, great guy, he came back very low in access to solutions, and he came to me and said, Ken, I don't understand, like I feel like I do this. And when he looked at his feedback from 3 employee partners, they made it clear that he certainly does ask, he seeks a lot of feedback, and we saw that from the communication survey. We also saw here that he gives them access to real problems, access to people and resources. He did everything right, but the solution, what he was doing is holding the solution to be his decision for him to implement and not allowing employees to actually do it. And as we worked through it, we found this was actually making his job much harder than it needed to be, and was frustrating his employees, and he had a nice breakthrough in the process. So you may use the employee involvement survey maybe in the ELD lesson 4, where you look at the art of delegation. Employee involvement for a manager is very important to be an effective delegator, is get people involved and give them the access to what they need. EPL lesson 8, realizing full potential, especially if you have a manager in an EPL. As Rich told me many years ago, he said, you know, I can turn the, I think it was the EPL, I can turn the EPL into anything you want it to be based on what the objectives are for the program. I can make the program do whatever it needs to do. And I think it's a good point, and I would agree with that. And this is an example where, depending on the objectives, if you have a manager in a program, the involvement assessment could be very effective here in lesson 8. The other side is you may have suspicions about challenges that managers are dealing with based on feedback from their management. Maybe the CEO of the company who you spoke to before the program said, Jim's a great guy, but here are some problems. And that may be a way that you decide which tools to use here as well and pull them anywhere into a program. The EPL Lesson 5, Empowering the Team. This is a great way. How do you empower the team? You get them involved. You give them access to the problems. You let them go solve problems. And so as we all know, managers who feel overwhelmed in their jobs often aren't doing a good job of using the resources they have, and employee involvement is an important way for them to do that. Good. Okay. Any questions on involvement?
We do have some questions here. Dr. Al is asking, what does MAQ stand for?
MAQ, Dr. Al, was a measure of management performance that was used actually by Mouton and Blake originally, and then it was picked up by Hall, who used it to measure management performance. And it's essentially a measure of promotion rates within an organization, and it provided them with a standard way to look at effective managers. And he also saw correlations to high MAQ scores correlating well with responsibility for people and capital, and just qualitative value that senior managers placed on their subordinate managers in performance evaluation. So it was the measure that they used so they could compare managers across multiple work domains, multiple industries, things like that.
Okay. Go ahead. Did you finish?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if Dr. Al's happy with that answer, I'll go with it.
Okay. Then I do have a statement, not a question, from Rich Lewine that says, high D5 in the PES is a factor in folks not getting involved without invitation. Not sure exactly what he means by that, but what we can do is I can unmute him.
Yeah.
You want to explain that, Rich?
Hi, guys. Hope everybody's doing well. Yeah,
hey, Rich.
Hi, Kent. You're doing a great job here. I'm really re-inspired. I really am.
Awesome.
I've got some places to use this stuff, and I have questions about logistics and things like that, but we don't need to take for that. On the high D5 factor, this morning, I'm working with one of my clients in Greenwich via GoToMeeting, and she's having a little problem there finding time. And there are two people in particular we were talking about that she has to depend on to get freed up to do her job as a boss, which is sell. And she hasn't been doing it for various reasons. And I pulled up the two profiles of these people. One's an 8 and one's a 9. And they do not initiate. So our discussion this morning was around how long has that been going on? Forever. I said, okay, you need them now. If you want them empowered and engaged, the buzzwords of today, it just means you need to give them an opportunity to do that. So invite them in, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think about it, this high tolerance for people, particularly younger folks, they'll just put up with it until you make it important for them to do something. They just continue to do what they're doing because the organization is there already. It's not up to them, in this case, to make the sales. They have the job. The machine is running. They don't even think about how can they change unless you ask them. That's all. That's what that means.
Yeah. That's great, Rich. Thank you. I think it's a good point. And again, one more measure that we have at LMI to help identify challenges like this, and the employee involvement tool is just, it's a great tool where you can measure and get more objective understanding of what might be going on and where to apply your efforts in terms of facilitating. So very good. Any other questions? We good to move on?
Yep, we're good to move on.
Awesome. Next one, communication. Now we talked about this last time, but I want to touch on it again. This is through the Personnel Relations Survey and the Johari window. Just a couple thoughts. A number of you completed the assessment for this that we sent out. We actually, based on feedback, made some revisions to the report for some obvious changes that were very helpful. and made sense. And some I was a little embarrassed by, but we got it cleaned up. And I sent you back updated reports this morning. Tried to send an email to let you know what's going on. And but hopefully you get that and keep sending the feedback because we like to get it. The instrument though is awesome for measuring communication to help people look at the communication process. And we went through the Johari window, but it looks at essentially feedback seeking or asking or listening. Sometimes people get confused with what are we talking about feedback. Are you talking about giving feedback or getting feedback? In this case, we're talking about getting feedback. The other is exposure. So we have these two dimensions, and what we know from this is the level of feedback seeking defines where that line is between the arena and your blind spot. And your blind spot's exactly what you think it is. Things that are unknown to you are blind spots. Things that employees know about you but you don't know are blind spots. On the other dimension, exposure, as you move down that vertical axis, you'll see that the line between arena and facade is actually your exposure score. So if we do this, you get the two scores on feedback seeking and exposure. That creates a quadrant, and the quadrant has 4 areas: the arena, which is what you might think it is, the arena of ideas, the arena of good communication practices. And actually, Dr. Al has a great article that he wrote, I think a little while ago, on this Johari window that I would recommend for everyone to read to learn more about it. The idea, though, is we want the arena to be large. We want it to be generally square, in that the level of feedback seeking and the level of exposure are generally equal. And in the assessment, what you get feedback on 3 areas, which is one is how do you communicate based on your Johari window? How do you communicate with your subordinate employees? How do you communicate with colleagues or peers? And how do you communicate with your boss? So when you complete that assessment, you get feedback on those 3 communication approaches in terms of your own communication through that self-assessment. And what we want to see there are 3 Johari windows with arenas that are large, square, approaching a score of 70 percentile is ideal in the study, but generally I find anything above 50th percentile is not bad. Anything below that, you have some work to do. If the arena is not square, maybe it's long and thin, either long and thin vertically or long and thin horizontally. I don't want to get too far into this, but you end up being that you have someone who is doing a lot of feedback seeking, asking a lot but not sharing a lot. That may be something you'd call like a nosy neighbor. You know, the person who's out there always trying to get information out of you but never really shares much about what they think. The long, slender arena that's vertical, meaning it's low in feedback seeking, high in exposure, you probably have a variety of ways to characterize it, but one way is the know-it-all. Someone who is always telling you what they think and they rarely shut up long enough to listen to what you have to say is someone who is a know-it-all. And you get various levels within feedback where you can see beyond that across the 3 areas of how do I communicate with my peers, how do I communicate with employees, how do I communicate with my boss. Beyond just the good Johari window that I just described, you also want to look at differences in the Johari window. So for instance, maybe I tend to have a good communication style with my boss, but with employees I have a little tiny arena. You know, I treat my employees like mushrooms and I don't tell them much, and I won't tell you that. I'm sure you all have that going through your head right now, but I'll try not to swear on the call. But you know, you bury them in that stuff that smells. Because you don't tell them much and you don't listen much to them. And we know in that style is power, the power relationship is influencing communication. What we know from the study is that's bad communication, and the high-achieving leaders did not exhibit differences in communication style based on power relationship. So then when you look at the results, you're looking for a good Johari window, and you're looking for a consistently good Johari window across the 3 relationships of with employees, with your peers or subordinates, like other managers in the company who have no power over you, and your boss who has a lot of power over you, is very important here. And where you don't have that, you have work to do in goal setting and all the good stuff that we do in facilitation, help people diagnose what's going on, why is the communication a challenge, and what can we do to fix it. So This is a simple but very exciting model to use and to facilitate with, because it tells so much from two simple measures about communication process. And I shared it here as the EPP Lesson 4, but the might also be useful in an EPL. Again, depending on individual goals, you could use a tool like this at the beginning or end of a program. And the ELD Lesson 5, effective communication, would be perfect for this, that you could integrate in. And when I say integrate in, it could be maybe you add an extra session to the process where you do communication 1 week, and you're reviewing the Lesson 5. Maybe the following week you go over the feedback instrument. So you can vary this, whether it's tying it into maybe an existing session you have, extending that session a bit, or even scheduling an extra session. Or even, I mentioned at the end here, scheduling a separate communication workshop where you showcase what we're about and what we do. This can be a great tool to do that and then draw people into programs. Why don't we break, since I'm switching across, any questions on that area?
Well, we're going to have some questions here, but I'm also going to bring up the fact that's a great one to use in conjunction with the effective communication program. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I do have a message here from Mark Way that says, incidentally, MAQ stands for Managerial Achievement Quotient.
Okay, great.
Okay, and he probably looked that up, or he already knew that because he's a smart guy. Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Ray, you are unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Ken. Something just came to my mind. I know when we use these, this is based on, when I took it, it's based on my thought process only. Are you talking about when you do this, you're just using it in that area only? You're not doing the feedback from other people who are peers or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a good point, Ray. And honestly, my focus in these first 2 webinars is to keep this simple. So we can tie something in that's easy to use, and the self-assessment provides good feedback on an individual's own attitudes about communication. There is also feedback instruments where you can have employees provide feedback. Now, as you can imagine, communication is a good example. So if I use both communication instruments, the leader instrument and the rater instrument, with 3 people, I actually, in that environment, I will actually get 9 Johari windows. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'm very familiar with it, and I've read all the research, and I read everything Jay Hall has written, and I'm a big fan of this, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. But the first time out, I think sometimes it's better crawl, walk, and run, and that's why I really haven't talked much about the raters, Ray, is I feel like you can get a lot of value out of this just using the simple leader assessment. Once you get comfortable with that, and you get comfortable with Johari windows, then you maybe jump out and start using feedback as well, and you use the rater tools. And I know some people on the call here, like Alan and Mark Way and others, have used the tools before pretty extensively. So they're probably already doing this and they're comfortable with it. But what I want to focus on here is, if you haven't done it before, keep it simple. Try just the leader instrument. Don't get into the other stuff. And then when you get comfortable with it, come back, talk to me, talk to others who are more experienced, as we create a forum to share ideas and for people to ask questions. Get involved in that. Get involved in additional webinars that'll follow this, that'll dive deeper into that, and doing very sophisticated feedback analysis. So that's a long answer to the question, Ray, but that's my thinking.
No, and I agree with that, because my concern was the fact that you really have to set up the process correctly for those 3 people, because they're not anonymous. and there's a whole concept that goes with the models for management that builds for that. No, I like this idea because I agree with the simplicity. The whole program is based on the self-evaluation.
Right.
And any of them. So I agree with that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's I've heard comments from others in the past that, boy, I really like that Teleo stuff, but don't you have to be like a rocket scientist to use it? And my feeling is you don't. There are simple ways to apply it, like just pulling one assessment into a program, and that's where I wanted to make this very approachable to everybody. But if you want to get fancy, feel free to give me a call. I love to talk about it.
Not for a while. I like simple stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
Motivation. Okay, wait, another question, I'm sorry.
Okay, now as we move forward, I could see us doing more of these webinars that get more into the specifics of different assessments that we have here from Teleomicrics. So don't think that this is going to be it. This is just the beginning. So any other questions? It doesn't look like it, so it's all yours. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Sam. So let's move on to motivation. Now, motivation is really powerful. I think understanding motivation through a tool like this and through the other work we do with LMI is so powerful for people in a leadership role to be able to effectively connect with what motivates other people and get them to really engage and commit to the goals of the organization is a key, I think, success factor in our work. And the Management of Motives Index uses the Maslow model of needs to look at motivation. And the key underlying theme of this is that we are all motivated by our own wants and needs, that if we do not fulfill these lower order needs progressively up the pyramid, that we're kind of stuck at that level. So if we're worried about survival, if we're worried about aspects of we don't understand how to do our job, we're uncomfortable with our job, we're uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable in our environment, that can create some problems as we move up and we meet our basic needs, which most employees and organizations do, but some don't. For instance, a basic issue may be I have a very sick family member, maybe a parent. I have a 90-year-old mother in a nursing home right now with dementia, and I routinely get calls from the nursing home that I have to respond to, and it's always in the back of your mind, worrying about those things. So you may have an employee who has that in a more serious way, taking care of a family member or something like that, and that may cause triggers in these very basic needs that have them focused down low in the pyramid. But when the basic needs are met, people generally move up to safety. Safety needs, security. These might be, some examples are healthcare. I have good healthcare coverage. I don't have to worry about a sick family member because we have good insurance, and if my kids get sick, they're taken care of, and I don't worry about that. So as we meet those basic needs and we feel comfortable in our job and we feel like we're getting reasonably paid, we have good skills, then we move up to safety and we start to protect what we have, and that's what safety is about. When we have those safety needs met, we have that insurance in place, maybe we have a retirement plan and all those good things, and we don't feel threatened in our environment. Then we move up to looking for belonging within the group. So we're good at our job, we feel pretty good, we don't feel threatened every day. Then, hey, I want to work with my coworkers. I want to feel accepted by coworkers. I want to feel like I'm part of a team and I'm accepted into that team, and those are belonging needs. As I move up beyond belonging and those basic needs are met, or those belonging needs are met above that, then I begin to want to stand out. I want to be someone who is recognized for the good work that I do, that within the group I get, my ego needs are met because I get recognition. I have certain status, maybe awards, things like that. Like an LMI partner, I've got the sales awards and things like that on the walls. Those could be self-esteem, ego needs being met there. And then as I move above that and those basic or those 4 levels of needs are met, then I move up into self-actualization. And self-actualization gets into Maslow's theories of really, I feel like I'm doing the work I was meant to do. I'm very comfortable with the work that I do, and I feel empowered to teach others, to engage others, and to help and mentor others. And employees in organizations, as they reach self-actualization, that's a point where they really become powerful in an organization, and their willingness to help others, to help others grow and to support others and the goals of the organization. The idea here with this is we can actually measure people's needs at each of these levels through the motivation instrument and see what their needs are. And that's kind of the feedback instrument, shows us what employee needs are. The assessment here, though, for managers actually helps managers see what their need focus areas are as managers. So what you'll find maybe our less mature managers tend to focus on basic and safety needs. In other words, telling employees, you're paid fairly, you have a good job, you ought to be happy. And the employees feel like, no, actually, I want more. I want to grow. I want more responsibility. And the less mature, less effective managers are maybe stuck down there at the bottom. The more effective high achievers tend to balance and focus more at the top where the growth areas are. This is a fairly complex model that I can't fully dive into today, but what the tool does is it actually shows us that these lower order need areas belonging within the team's safety basic needs tend to be sustainers. In other words, I can't motivate others with those. I only get into problems if those needs are unmet. Once those needs are met, they stop being important. And the best analogy that I've heard is imagine you're thirsty and I bring in a case of water. And you say, oh, great, I was real thirsty. And I give you a bottle of water, and you drink that water, and your thirst is quenched. Now I give you another bottle of water. And you're thinking, well, I'm still maybe a little thirsty, but I don't know. And I say, no, you need to drink that. And you take the bottle of water, and you drink it. At that point, you are completely satiated, and I hand you yet another bottle of water and say, here, you need to drink this. What happens is at this point, I don't want water, I'm not thirsty, and I don't understand why you're giving it to me, but it certainly is not something that I'm motivated for. It is an example of a sustainer. So if I lack water, I'm going to focus on getting it, and the more thirsty I am, the more aggressively I may focus on getting it, but I reach a point where it's just irrelevant. Giving me more water won't motivate me to do a better job, won't motivate me to necessarily, for instance, seek more water. And there's a parallel study to this from Friedrich Hertzberg that looks at what these things as sustainers. So if they're missing, I will aggressively look for them, but if I have them in adequate quantity, I don't need them. I don't need more, and it certainly won't motivate me to perform higher. Hertzberg did a great article. It's one of Harvard Business Review's most popular articles. I encourage you to read it if you haven't. And let me show you the other half. The other half of that equation is Hertzberg's motivators. The higher order needs, which in belonging are relationship with my boss, having my ego needs met, reaching that self-actualization point where I really feel like I'm doing the work I was meant to do, those are motivators that I can take in almost unlimited quantity and will motivate me. Getting more work that I love to do will motivate me. Getting more responsibility around the work that I love to do will motivate me. So as we look at this, the best managers tended to focus on Hertzberg's motivators while recognizing that the sustainers had to be taken care of if they were missing. But once they're taken care of, you quickly move up to the motivators and you align your management that way. And this model is powerful, and it helps managers begin to understand that all motivation is individual. It is based on the employee's own needs, and it's critical that the managers focus on finding out what the individual employee needs are, meeting those needs, and as quickly as possible moving up into those Hertzberg motivator areas of need fulfillment as a manager. So powerful model, exciting model, maybe a little more complex, would require you to perhaps investigate a little more, read a little bit more on Hertzberg, and the article in HBR would be great, as well as the instrument itself. So this can be neat, and the ELD lesson 6, motivating people to produce and understanding motivation. Maybe the EPL lesson 3 on motivating through attitudes and habits. Now, the EPL is more about motivating yourself, but if they're in a management role, you can dovetail that into motivating others. And then finally, the EPP lesson 4 could be an excellent place to use motivation as well through improving productivity through communication. The reason I say that is communication involves really understanding and effectively communicating with your employees, and part of that is understanding the employee and understanding what their needs are and connecting with that employee at a deeper level. So you make sure you're adapting your management style to what their needs are. So powerful stuff, great module, and I'm going to move on to power. Power and empowerment. This is the 5th module or model in the Teleomicrics series, and it looks at 2 areas. One, it looks at motivation and access, and in this, in motivation, it looks at 3 motivational drives for managers. First being personalized. These are more selfish power motivations. So why do I want power? I want it for my own gain. Personalized is less effective, but it is present. Socialized is power for the good of the organization to achieve organizational goals. And affiliative is a lack of power motivation, actually. It's not really a motivation in itself, but it's an indication, if it's strong, that the manager isn't comfortable with power or using power. And often people in a management role who are high in affiliative or affiliation dominates their thinking can be very ineffective managers because they don't know how to get things done and be effective at it. So looking at the 3 areas of motivation is one part of the model. And then, whoops, down here we have sharing, which if you see the pie chart there, the other half of the model is what are my motives for using power, and then how do I use power? And you'll see that the pie chart shows how much of the power that they have do they share with subordinates, and how much of the power that they have do they control and use for themselves in terms of decision making. So a very nice model. I think it can be very indicative of people who are challenged with the fact that managers are empowered, they have power, they're given institutional authority to do things, yet they may be uncomfortable actually using that. For instance, signs can be they're uncomfortable being called the boss, they're uncomfortable with decision making, they're uncomfortable making decisions that are unpopular. Those are all indications of a manager who may be struggling with power. And what we know in the model is that the high achievers tended to focus on socialized power. They had some personalized power motivation as well, but they had very little affiliative scores, meaning they were very comfortable using power to get things done, and they tended to share power about 50-50. So they were willing to take what they were given and share it with others to help them get their jobs done. Very exciting tool. Power is very interesting, and I find this produces very interesting results with groups. How to use it? Maybe the ELD lesson 3, and exercising authority. A key aspect of power is authority and decision making. The EPL lesson 8, helping a manager or maybe a potential manager evaluate their readiness for leadership, because as you look at potential managers, maybe you have a group of potential managers, if they're really high in affiliation, they may have some challenges, and this may be a miserable job for them if they can't reconcile this attitude about power and figure it out how they want to handle it. And then the EPP lesson 5, empowering the team, obviously can be a great place to use power. Okay, any questions? Take a minute just to see if there are any questions out there.
Nope, I do not see any questions, so we could move on to the last one.
Must be my brilliant presentation, just answering them all.
Must be.
So the last one that ties it all together is management style. Management style is really not necessarily a, it kind of ties the model together versus being one of the elements within the model. But what it looks at is 2 aspects of management. One is concern for people. You see that in the vertical axis on the left. And the other is concern for the job or task accomplishment. So you can think of the concern for the job as being, those checklists of getting things done, very task-oriented, very driven to hit the goals, hit the targets, hit the numbers, where on the left it's concern for morale, it's concern for people's satisfaction, it's concern for happiness on the job, and do the people really like the job, and do they want to be here. So when we look at these 2 dimensions of management style or leadership style, this sort of quadrant or 5 different possibilities emerge. And what we learned from the model is that people are low in concern for people. In other words, I don't really care what you think, and low for concern for the job. I'm not really that worried about good high performance or the numbers. Those tend to be regulators. And regulators are safety seeking. They tend to look to stay out of trouble. You think of classic large bureaucracies like the federal government, state governments are examples of where regulators may thrive. Regulators tend to be, it's an acquired style. Regulators usually don't come this way, they become this way because of the culture. You can see there 2 of 10, meaning it's only effective about 20% of the time. In other words, 20% of employees respond to the regulator. I don't know who those 2 are, but they're not very impressive employees. So regulators are a very bad style of management. Then we move up to maybe high concern for people, low concern for the job. Those are called comforters, or they've been called country club managers. But the idea is they are also safety-seeking. The comforters tend to be back to power. They're uncomfortable with power. They tend to not worry about performance, and they're more concerned with keeping people happy. Unfortunately, they tend to do that through very superficial means, like pizza parties and things like that. On the other end of the axis, low concern for people and high concern for the job are the driving taskmasters who are pushing for the numbers and performance, and they're very achievement-seeking, but they tend to tell people what to do rather than collaborate. They tend to have a fairly negative view of people, so they're pretty much directing people on what to do. Those 3 styles, just coincidentally or as part of the study, tend to be theory X. The manipulator or compromiser, we sometimes call it, is a 4th style in the model that's sort of right in the middle: moderate concern for the job, moderate concern for people. Those are kind of political animals who are somewhat manipulative and a poor style. What we learn from management style, though, is that the developer knows that high performance and happy people go together. The 2 are not in conflict, and he knows that if he sets goals, sets high goals, stretch goals, and pushes people to achieve, they will be the happiest. We know that's effective in about 90% of employees. They like to be part of something bigger. They like to achieve. They like to have high levels of performance. And the developer knows that. The highest achievers in the study fell in the developer quadrant. The lower achievers fell in various other areas. You can use style in a number of areas: ELD Lesson 8, EPL Lesson 8 maybe, EPP Lesson 6 can all be areas where looking at, if you have managers and programs, pulling this out and using it to help understand how their style is applied in the workplace can be useful. Questions about any of the models?
I do not see any. Oh, we do have a hand raised, so I am going to call on Dr. Al. Go ahead. Dr.
Al, uh-oh.
Uh-oh. I wanted to thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you. The developer taskmaster quadrant, comforter, regulator.
Yeah.
That's a really useful picture. Parallax model. It's a very interesting model to apply. And where I had one thought. I've always wondered where the hell to put the manipulator, and I think over there on the side, kind of figuring out what in the world you're going to do that is really the place to put it. But just a thought. The thought is that a manipulator really doesn't get anywhere near the developer's results. So the manipulator really is borrowing from the other 3, but not from the high payoff ones, the developer. So I guess I would take that little part of that it locks in the developer, and I would get rid of it. That's my thought.
Yeah. No, it's a good thought out. And the other thing about the manipulator is that they're not consistently moderate concern for the job, moderate concern for people, but they score that way. They tend to spike in concern for people when they feel it's necessary, or they spike in concern for the job when they feel it's necessary. So they're bobbling around and pushing concern for the job to the forefront, or pulling it back and going up and worrying about keeping people happy and playing. They're very political, and they tend to play games, and they want you to think these are your ideas. So the manipulator in the model appears to be this static thing in the middle, when it's really the manipulator's kind of moving around the 4 core quadrants depending on the mood of the day, or how much the manipulator's manager is yelling at them that day, and they're adapting to all that. So keep that in mind with the manipulator, because sometimes that can be hard to explain.
Yeah, well stated. And that was not anything as a political commentary, correct?
Okay, nope. No, it wasn't.
Thank you, Ken.
So anybody else? Alan?
Alan, you're unmuted.
Okay. Ken, I have a question for you. In the LMI circles, it's many, many times, is that why did Dr. Hall put it in this sequence where believing people down to leadership style? Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not. I missed the first part of that. What are you talking about?
Well, when you start in the order of what these things are, from believing people all the way through the getting people involved down to leadership style, it's been brought up a number of times. Is why did Dr. Hall put it in this order, and why do we do it in this order? I was just curious about your thoughts on that.
Oh, so the ordering in the model of how we progress through it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a good question, and it may extend beyond the available time we have, but I think the progression as you go through and look at the model here, I'm going to screen back. So the question is, why do we go in this progression? And I think the first thing I would say is looking at values is the key. You know, if you look at anything from typical change models, is awareness is at the heart of it. We all know that belief systems and attitudes drive behavior. Paul Meyer talked about it extensively, and you got to get at those belief systems first before you start to change behaviors. Honestly, my opinion would be the middle four could be in any order that's convenient for you if you were going through the whole model, but style should be last because that ties it all together. How do you put all these behaviors together into actual practice on the ground when it comes to getting results? So I like the two that bookend values and style, and I'd say the four in the middle, you know, it's a coin toss. Which should come first? How's that fit with your thinking, Alan? Did I address your question?
Yes, I agree with it. I believe it's a process, and I believe that you have to look at the process and look at each manager to be different. And you may want to switch the upper four around simply because of the difference in the manager.
Yeah, I agree. And depending if you're, you know, today's focus is tying maybe one or two of these into an existing program. And I think very much around looking at their objectives and what they want to achieve is a key part of that decision process. Whoops. And there we go. Okay. But if there are any questions, I know we're out of time. I want to respect everybody's plan to be here till noon Eastern time. But I would say that I'm available if you have email. If you want to send me an email or give me a phone call, happy to talk about this anytime if you have additional questions. And please join us for November 11th for the next seminar, the next webinar. That'll be looking at Teleo as a program, as a standalone program, and how to integrate it together. And we'll address actually a couple of questions that came up on the call here that I skirted away from. We will address more thoroughly in the next webinar. Even to your question, Alan, about how do you tile this together into a complete model of leadership and treat it like a program in itself. And I think that can be delivered. We typically call it the Achieving Leader, Achieving Leader experience, borrowing from Mike Weaver. And his work with Teleo is a powerful way to deliver this. So that's what we're going to explore next time. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time today, and hopefully you'll join us on the 11th.
Great job, Kent. I want to thank everybody for being here. Again, this webinar has been recorded, and I will put it up on the cloud and send everybody a link to go view it. As there was a lot of information, you can't keep all the notes at one time. So thank you, and we will catch you again on the 11th. This webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. This webinar has ended.